had an opportunity to meet him, and he heard him say such words. He told him of a vast plain in the north where he had sometimes seen in the morning sun the smoke of 1,000 villages where no missionary had ever been. The young Scottish student, after hearing that, his heart went to Africa. He wanted now to go to Africa. And interestingly, it says that the first time he ever got an opportunity to preach, he forgot his whole sermon. And he said, this was all the pulpit. He says, friends, I've forgotten all I had to say. And he hurried out of the pulpit and left the chapel. But still, the Lord used him. So, but after hearing Robert Moffett's young Dale's mind was haunted by the vision of finding that distant route to those villages where no missionary had been. And his favorite passage, which is commonly known as the Great Commission, that is Matthew chapter 28, verse 18 to 22, now spoke to him with a new urgency. And the words go, if you return there, go and make disciples. He saw it as saying to him, go as one who will mark a route, as a pathfinder, as a pioneer, and make disciples or evangelize. To him it was now a command as go and work as a missionary. And especially the last part of that passage, which says, Lo, I'm with you now until the end. To him, he now understood it as if the Lord was speaking to him and saying, Lo, I'm with you, hence you'll never be alone, and you have nothing to fear. And he himself said, that is the promise I rely upon. So it is a word from a gentleman of honor, that's the Lord Jesus Christ. So shortly after that, he received an appointment under the London Missionary Society, and he hurried home to his home in Scotland to tell it to his parents. His parents were devoted Christians at that time, were with him. They heartily entered into his missionary plan. As they talked about in that evening, they agreed that they are in full support of him going to Africa as a missionary. And the following day, he rose up and he had some time of devotion together, and they read. Again, he selected where to read from, and it was in Psalm 121, verses 5, 7, and 8, where whatever they say, the Lord is your keeper, the Lord shall preserve you from all evil, the Lord will preserve your going out and coming in from this time henceforth and even forevermore. So then, that is when he, after visiting his parents, he decided now to go to Africa, and that was on December 8th, 1840. He sailed for Africa, going first to South Africa. He arrived at Cape Town, and then Algoa, and then soon was into the interior where Robert Moffett was working in a territory called the Bakwana territory. And on his way, it says he was angered by the unkind treatment which he saw, for which the other Europeans were subjecting the locals wherever he met. But he mingled freely among them, started healing treating their diseases, disarming their hostilities by interesting them in something unusual. He soon reached the conclusion that a noble and true heart was a better mainspring to overcome and direct natives than the abuse which he had seen the other Europeans subject to the natives there. But his intense desire was to go where no other missionary had been, and so he moved on to another place called Mabota, and that was northward into the interior, and he preached wherever he could go. He was preaching the gospel there, and it said that the wonder of Christ's atonement was so much in his thinking and even appeared in his preachings. He was even able to translate some hymns from English to the local languages there. His first hymn to be translated was "There is a fountain filled with blood." They were to translate that to the local language. But this locality was infested with many lions, and at one time a lion sprang from the bush and seized David Livingstone on his shoulder and tore his flesh and even broke his arm. And he said he could not lift his arm without much pain all over the whole of his life from that point. It even left him with 11 tooth marks as permanent scars. Still, he persevered and continued on his missionary field. Something about his family and marriage. He was married in 1844 to the oldest daughter of Robert and Mary Moffat, and this daughter had been raised up in South Africa, and after their marriage was very helpful to the work of missionary work there. However, Mary got ill so many times. They had 6 children together, but she was so much afflicted with illness, and more than once she was paralyzed. And at one time, David Livingstone had to send Mary and the children back to England, and later she died in 1862, which was a very great loss to David to work without her. Let's look at something of Livingstone's further missionary endeavors and explorations. In 1845, Livingstone, that was the time before his wife died, he moved with his wife to another territory called Chonuan. Sorry, some of these names are difficult. Then later to Kolebeng, where a chief called Shikeri was the tribal chief, and it is said that this chief was actually his first known convert in Africa. As he continued with his missionary work, he would write letters, and it is said that each letter would end with these words, this question: who will penetrate the heart of Africa? And he also began a tour and passed through the Kalahari Desert, where for many days they struggled without water, but later was able to discover a lake called Lake Ngami. The chief of that place still welcomed them, but they found that the place was not suitable to establish a mission there. And later, David conceived the idea that if a way would be opened from the interior to the coast, then Christianity and civilization and commerce would move freely to the people in the interior of the continent. So he then sent his family back to England and embarked on his new purpose of going now to open a route through the interior to the coast, so that Christianity, the missionaries would come after him or pass through, and so that they would easily reach the coast and through the interior while preaching the gospel. But on this new purpose, he met many obstacles. He met and hindered so many opposition, for example, from the Dutch colonialists who opposed his efforts so much, and even retaliation of destroying his home and carrying away his goods. But he was unhindered even from these oppositions, and he continued exploring the areas, the regions around, as he was moving his way towards the coast. In all this, he sought to do his Father's will, and he wrote and said, "As for me, I'm determined to open up Africa or perish." In 1853, he threw himself into the heart of Africa, and after 7 months of untold hardship, he reached the coast at a place called St. Paul de Luanda. That was at the west coast. And during this journey, he had 31 attacks of intermittent fever, and towards the close of this, was accompanied with dysentery of the most painful type, and he was often destitute of food, and he lacked even sometimes his best needs. And as he moved on the way, the horrors of polygamy, incest, slavery, cannibalism, and many others which he saw on the way drew mightily on the tender hearts of this noble Christian. And he was able to visit England 2 times as he progressed with his plan to open Africa. But in all his, and he did many explorations. He even wrote a book known as, with the title Missionary Travels, which awakened great interest for Africa while there in England. He was also able to discover Victoria Falls and the River Zambezi in the southern part of Africa, and he also tried to find where the source of the River Nile was. But as in all these explorations, he never forgot that he was a missionary. And wherever he went, he would scatter the seed of the gospel, believing that others would reap what he had sown. I'll rush on to David's. I've left out so many things again because of time, so I'll rush on to David's final days, David Livingstone's final days. After he had returned from England the second time of his visit, he commenced his last series of explorations, and extracts from his journal show extreme weakness from which the brave missionary suffered. Frequent sicknesses were doing a fatal work. At last, when the end of his journey, that's his journey here on earth, seemed to be almost in sight, he refused even the men who accompanied him to accompany him further, and he was forced to travel wearily 500 miles alone to a place called Ujiji, that is in Tanzania now, and only to find that the supplies which had been left for him there had been stolen by an Arab trader. Every hope for him seemed to be gone, but God did not abandon his faithful child. Being now so far in the inside of the African jungles, and because at this time he was not able to send reports back to England, they even thought he had died. Because they sent from England, they sent someone from America called Henry Martin Stanley to look for him. So he went and looked for him, he searched for him, and at last he was able to find him in this place called Ujiji in Tanzania. They lived together for 4 months. But after Henry Martin Stanley returned to America, he attempted another exploration, but now at this point he was so weak and very his body in great pain. But he still hoped to recover, and as he went on this exploration and still preaching the gospel, he was now carried by his men on a seat which was put on poles. He grew so weary after some time that the men decided to put him down and leave. Destitute now of all earthly comforts, he longed to reach his mansion in the skies. When at last his faithful servants bore him, carried him to a little village in a place called Ella, a hut was prepared for him, and a bed of grass raised from the floor by sticks was made for him. The next day he lay quiet, and his attendants knew that his death was close by. The next morning he was found kneeling before his bed, but dead. And his heart was buried under a tree. there where he died, and a little monument was raised there. And then his remains were 1 year later transported to London, to Westminster Abbey, where he was buried. So what are some of the inspirations which we see from the life of David? So though he accomplished much in geographical standpoint, yet these accomplishments were secondary in his estimation. His great purpose was to open the way for the gospel and to put a stop to slave trade. And in both of these purposes he was successful, though most of the fruit was harvested after he was gone. He was successful in opening up Africa and becoming a pathfinder to the other missionaries who came after him. He was a very zealous and determined man, as you have even seen from his biography. And though he went through so many hardships, bodily pains, and so much luck, but he did not give up on his mission. He entrusted his life to the hands of God and labored till the end. May we borrow the same zeal and determination which we see in this missionary who went before us, David Livingstone. So he gave up the comforts of an easy life for the hardships he encountered in Africa, so that people would hear the gospel. We see that he had perseverance, even with many times lacking business and going through so much difficulty as we have seen. He still persevered to the end, and he was able to fulfill the purposes of being a missionary, and a pioneer missionary, but also a pathfinder in Africa. May we copy his example in this day where we still face a task unfinished, where we still need to go out and preach the gospel to thousands and thousands of people. May we copy his example. Amen. Let's pray again. Lord, we thank you, and as we have heard the biography of your servant whom you used mightily, again may we be inspired to follow his example, to reach out to the unreached with zeal, with determination, with perseverance. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.